Welcome back to the second part of the Sign In with Apple series. So to save some time, I created an UI. So this is a label and these two are text fields, and I have just created the outlet of these text fields. That's it. And now we'll learn how to have the Apple button, the different types of buttons we can have, custom, default. Let us quickly add a view for holding the Apple's button. I'll keep a stack view for that. Vertical stack view with leading, trailing, and with 20 as the vertical spacing. I'll keep the height as 50 for the time being, and I'll keep this height priority as 750, that is high. Okay, let's create the outlet. I'll name this as Apple stack view. Let us create two functions. One, create Apple default button, and second, create Apple custom button. Let us call create Apple default button first, and we'll just create the default button first. So I have to import the authentication services first, then I'll make the button. With the authorization ID button with button type and button style. So we have four options here. So we can have an Apple button with continue text, continue with Apple, or sign in with Apple, or sign up with Apple, or the default one. I think default is the sign in with Apple button. So let's go with the sign in first, and these are for the themes. So black is for the white mode or the light mode, and white is for the dark mode, and this is a button which has a white outline, so we'll see that. So let's start with black first, and I'll just add it in my stack view, and that's it. Let me present my phone, and let us run the app to see the results first. Okay, nice, we got a sign in with Apple button. Currently on clicking it's not working since we haven't written any target code. So let us see the other designs as well with this default button. Let's make this as white, and let us run the app again. So this is complete white now with the white outline. So yeah, we have a button like this in the white outline. Now let us keep this to black first and see the other textual changes as well. So let us see continue, and it will give you continue with Apple. Let us see sign up. It should give sign up with Apple. Yes, and we already have seen the sign in, and let us check default. I think for the default sign in with Apple will be the case. Yes, sign in with Apple. Okay, so these are the various default buttons which we can make, or we can say these are the system buttons which we can make. Now let us go to the storyboard, and rather than having this as a rectangular stack box, let us choose a square shape. So let us do something like 50-50, and let's make this 50, and I believe I have to give the center horizontal as well. Okay, so now this is square. Now let's go back and run the code and see what happens. So Apple automatically converts this in a logo. So we can change the other designs and see as well, and it should work like that only, and it should work fine. And if we write something like continue it doesn't matter because it's a square box, and in the square box the Apple logo will only fit. So these are the different combinations of default button. So let's roll back to our original rectangular button, and we are back with our rectangular button. Now let us see custom button. So I'll call this custom button function instead of default, and I'll create a default button, simple UI button. Okay, and in the assets I've already added two logos, one darker one is the white one, lighter one. So let us create that button. I'll keep the title for the time being sign in with Apple, and I'll add that image of the Apple button logo. And finally I'll add this button to the stack view. Let's see how it looks like. So here it is. I'll just do some insetting to make this image a little bit in the center, and I'll make this color to black as well. So after a little bit of tweaking, I was able to make this button. So this is a plain simple UI button, but we'll add the same target which is of the system button with this custom button as well. So we can use both system or custom buttons. So I'll add the target in a moment. Let us add the actions. So I'll make a function Apple button action, and I'll add the target for both the buttons and target. So both the targets are added now, and here we will create a request. Let us learn more about the AS authorization Apple ID request. Let us understand AS authorization Apple ID request. It inherits from AS authorization open ID request. It has three important things: requested scopes, state, nonce. The requested scopes is the contact information which is requested from the user during authentication, and the possible values are email and full name. We can set this requested scope array to empty as well, or we can just ask for email or full name or both of them. State. State is the data that is returned to us in the response of the sign in with Apple unmodified, and this is within the application. So if the data is returned unmodified in the state variable, that means that you have successfully validated that request within the application. We'll see that as well in code. Nonce. It's a string value passed to the identity token. So whenever we create a request, we pass a nonce. Whenever we decode the identity token, we also see a nonce node there. It's used to secure the request at server's end by matching the nonce. So whenever we are sending the identity token to our own backend server, we also send a nonce field along it so that the server can verify that the request nonce matches with the identity tokens nonce. It's used to mitigate the replay attacks. There is one more property, requested operation. It's of type OpenID operation. It's a structure and it has four operation types: operation login, operation refresh, operation logout, operation implicit. So I tried this operation logout. I confused, I think, with sign out of Apple. I thought that this is related to sign out with Apple, but after reading this line, it feels like that after the successful authentication, once we receive the Apple ID credentials, it actually ends an authenticated session. Maybe from the other operations, Apple somewhere in the application keeps a cache or somewhere keep the authenticated session alive. By using this in the request, maybe uh, Apple ends the authenticated session somewhere in the cache or clears the cache. So I'm not sure about that. Let me know in comments if anybody has used this property and have different observations. So now let us create the AS authorization Apple ID request. Let authorization Apple ID provider. We need to create a provider first. Authorization Apple ID provider. Let request. Create request. Make sure whenever you are creating the action of sign in Apple button, don't use the password provider request. We need to only add the AS authorization Apple ID provider, not the password provider. We'll see the password provider in a moment. Request.requested scopes, email, full name, request.state. So I have created a function that will return a random string of n length, whatever I pass, and that I require in the state and nonce. So let us create a state first. Let me create the state variable in the controller first. And now I'll call first self.state equal to string dot generate random string of length 15, and I'll add this state here. Now I'll add a nonce and I'll do the same thing. I'll use this same function generate random string with length 15. So now I have created three things here. One is the requested scope, second is the state, third is the nonce, and I'm holding this state in a variable because I need to match this whenever the Apple ID credentials is returned after a successful authorization. Next, we need to create a controller, authorization controller, and that will be AS authorization controller with the request array. Delegate will be self, presentation text provider will be self, and authorization controller dot perform request. And I need to add the delegates as well, so I'll add the delegates somewhere down here. So it has two delegates. One did complete with authorization, and second did complete with error if there is any error. So for the error, I'll just print it. Let us write the code for did complete with authorization. Switch authorization dot credential case let credential as authorization Apple ID credential. That's the first case, and there will be another case, credential as AS password credential. And a default case, just break. So we'll see this AS password credential, and I'll let you know why I added this AS password credential. We'll do this in a moment, but for the time being, let us focus on the AS authorization Apple ID credential. First, let us see. Okay, I need to add one more delegate, and that is AS authorization controller presentation context providing, and here is the function presentation anchor, and I'll just return self dot view self.view.window. Now let us first see whether we are able to get the sign in with Apple window. So I'll just run the code, and here's my screen casted, and this is our custom button. So let me click on it, and yes, I am able to see the Apple screen. That's pretty cool. Now let us change the same thing, the target basically, to Apple's default button. So I'll just write Apple default button, and it has also the same target. So let us see whether this behaves exactly the same. So I'll click on this, and yes, the behavior is exactly the same. So with the Apple's custom button or the system button, you are able to trigger the same sign in with Apple window. We need to understand AS authorization password provider. So what is that? Generally, the combination of the Apple ID and the password provider is done to check whether there are existing accounts or not. So suppose you open your app, you land on the login page, and you want to trigger the existing credentials which might be saved in a keychain. So you can trigger them with the help of AS authorization password provider. So let me write the code for you. So suppose there is a function check for existing accounts, and this should be called from view.load check for existing accounts, and here we'll create two requests, one Apple ID request, which will be the same request which we created whenever we clicked on the button, and another will be password request, and this will be AS authorization password request password provider authorization password provider. Yes, so these are the two requests which needs to be passed in the authorization controller. So I need to write the same 4 lines, and I'll pass the two requests. Okay, and now see what happens, anything happens or not. Let us run to see if there is any change or anything happens. So when I run this, I get this error, no credentials available for login. Okay, so it means that we are calling this function in the view to load, but unfortunately we are landing in the error delegate, and this is what it is printing: the operation couldn't be completed, no credentials available for login. So why this error is coming? And let us also create some credentials in the keychain and then check whether we'll get this error or not. So in the next video, we'll see AS authorization Apple ID credential, AS password credential, and also we will try to solve this no credentials available for login mystery.